Hey there, it's Nick Willard, your host, and I beckon you to come in to Welcome to the Dungeon, Episode 2. Today, I'm going to be covering 3 different things once again, and it's going to be quests, quest lines, and the differences between the two, because those need to be completely separate to avoid a lot of confusion. Cityscaping, which I went over map building last time, and worldscaping and stuff, so I'm going to do the cityscaping this time to kind of keep that rolling. And then the last thing I'm going to do is the importance of roleplay, which I got that question from one of my casual players in one of my tests.
Yes, it started back a while back, like near noon. I didn't want nothing to do, just to sit back, yeah, just to slack and grab myself a brew. Why don't that sound good to you? I cut the stack, yeah, right in half, just to make less to chew. How many times I'd say to? You seem concerned, but I guess what I'm saying, it's okay. I'm okay, yeah.
The first thing I'm going to go over today is cityscaping. The first question you should ask yourself when you're about to build a city is it actually a city? Is it a village? Is it a town? Or it could be a full-blown city, or it could be the capital. You don't really know. When it comes to those questions, you gotta figure that out beforehand so you can figure out exactly what needs to be inside of your city, and whether or not your city has walls, or whether or not there's a court system or a lot of guards. It can matter for both good and evil campaigns, simply because if somebody's going to go into town and possibly raid it, then they're going to want to know all of this information, and you're going to have to know it beforehand so that it'll be an easier, and things will just kind of flow together as your party moves through town. And that brings me into the second topic of cityscaping, which is your walls and authority figures. Does it have walls? What are the walls made of? How high are the walls? What are the buildings made of inside of the town? Is it one of those big proper cities like I was talking about? Is it going to have a guardhouse at every single corner of the wall? Is there going to be some noble's castle in the back? Is there a big city hall, or is it just looks like it's the house on the end of the street? I mean, the possibilities are endless that you can go with, but make sure to try and keep all of them in mind as you're building cities, to kind of diversify between your cities, because if your cities start looking the same and being the same, they can get kind of dull and they'll drag out. You'll lose interest really fast. And that's what we're trying to avoid. And the third part of our cityscaping is shaping out the town. After you make the decision of whether there's walls or not, you're going to want to put those on your little map first. I like to use graph paper, but use whatever paper works for you. It just tends to keep me neat so I can stay on some lines. But then after you have your walls, I typically like to start with the bigger buildings, the ones that are going to take up more room, like if there possibly is a noble's castle in town, or a coliseum perhaps. There's a whole lot of things you can do with the bigger buildings. Secondly, I like to do my obscure buildings, so things like your chapels or possibly your quest-specific buildings. And those are the things you're going to want to add in after those big ones. And then once you've got the general structure laid out of how you want your city to look, then it's time to lay in the establishments, because those are the types of things that you can just make fit where they may. And don't forget, you can always use shaping your cities and shaping your buildings to kind of set the mood for your party so that they know more so what they're walking into. You know, if you walk up to a city that's got barricades outside the walls with spikes and it just looks deathly and ghastly from the outside, you walk up to a gate and it's just rusted, there's no real guards, you know, might be a place for your thief to find a new best friend. On the other hand, you could be walking up to a fine stonewalled city, and in that stonewalled city, over the top of the walls, you could see a chapel of the best god in the RPG that you're playing, and higher than the Sistine Chapel. it can go either way. So it helps set the tone and set the mood so your players can kind of make their best guess, at least, as they're walking into a city, what to expect. In this detail, you cannot forget. Always add in with your buildings ample opportunities for quests, such as like maybe a guild hall where you can keep some gold in the party's pockets all the time. Possibly like plenty of quest opportunities in taverns and brothels and pubs, just to like kick up some dirt and see if there's any gritty type quests about, because that's generally where I like to place those. And I always think it's fun to leave some open opportunities when you're building your city for your party members to stub their toes, so to speak. For instance, that merchant caravan that they raided on the way into this next town, well, turns out they're actually from this town, and they have a shop set up, and they just got a raven as you came into town. Oops. And that brings me to the second segment of our episode, quests and quest lines, and keeping them separate. The only thing that I like to carry over between quests and quest lines, or single quests or quest lines altogether, is generally the protagonist in the situation. Either whether that be the person that hired you or hired your players, or a person that's aiding and assisting you along the way, or possibly even a person that they're sent to guard to go out on a quest. Because if you keep all the antagonists mixed up and some of the common players, or the common NPCs, I mean, it kind of tends to lead to a little bit of confusion, not able to keep track of all of the quests that you've got going on if your party is taking multiple quests. That also brings me back to, I'd like to build my full world, so there's ample opportunities. But yeah, so just keep them separate, keeps it easy, keeps it simple for you to keep track of, and all in all, if it's simpler for you, then it's probably better for the whole group. For your single quests, that can be anything from, clearing a hovel of ravenous, filthy goblins and taking the 25 gold pieces they have in their stores, or it could be something like getting sent into your imminent doom, have to go retrieve an amulet from a dragon's hoard at level 3. Either or, your single quest can vary in difficulty, vary in many different things. I also try to push towards not making every single quest combat-driven. Combat-driven quests are fun, and it keeps everybody doing their cool stuff and flinging their weapons and trying to do acrobatics and flips over and climbing on giants' backs and stuff. But alongside that, you can also build quests with an option. And what I mean by that is try something such as like an emissary quest or a delivery style quest, take this, bring it here to this guy, and then come back. Something. These styles of quests leave it really open-ended, especially if it's planned that they run into conflict, because then they can have a choice. They can either solve it with diplomacy or a handful of other skill checks that they can use off of their charisma bases, or it could end up just being, botched and intimidate roll. Well, here we go, everybody roll initiative. So remember, for single quests, side quests, anything like that, it can be absolutely anything that you choose. But it seems to be more fun for the players if you leave it a little open-ended. Make it so that they can either solve it with their attack rolls or with their skill checks. And I cannot stress this enough. Keep your single quests and your side quests and all of the quests that are a one-time deal and then you don't need to talk to that person ever again. Just keep them apart from your main quests and your quest lines and your quests that are heavy on the story, because those are the quests. Now it's time for the flip side, quest lines. That is where I like to say that the dungeon master, the game master, gets to have a little bit more fun. Because this is your storyline. You've made this storyline, and you know exactly how this storyline plays out. Your players don't. So, what I like to do is I like to start by just dropping subtle hints as they're getting closer and closer to sniffing up the quest. And remember, it's your job as a DM to both aid your players and to kill them. So, just all the more reason to make your allies friendlier and your enemies of your players much, much more vicious. And with it being said that you have to both aid and kill your players, I'm gonna say this is one of my most recently acquired attributes. I don't really know how to put that in a DM standpoint, but make them always figure out the scenario by themselves. It's just going to make it so that they're a little more challenged, and who doesn't like a challenge when they're playing games? Isn't that why we play? It has to be. So if you make them figure out all the scenarios, it'll also help them getting more used to your DMing and keep a more open eye to what they should be looking for next time they encounter something of the same caliber. I like to do quest lines the same way that I like to do everything DM-wise. I generally like to get it done in a 3-step process. The only time that that's null and void, of course, is for main quest lines or quest lines that push story along, bits of story that are needed to be able to carry on farther into this campaign, or things that are going to be very, very useful to know every time you have a session. Another reason I like to keep it down to just 3 steps is because I don't think anybody really likes being on doing the same purpose and having the same purpose and possibly going through the same dungeon crawl for 3 months at a time. I don't know how often everybody likes to game, but I generally like to game weekly, and that's 4-hour sessions a month of doing the same thing. I, as a DM, go a little nuts when I do that, so I just keep it down. My 3 steps are as follows. Step 1, meet the problem. Maybe you just see them passing by and have the players not really think anything much of it. Like I said, drop in those subtle hints, and it doesn't. Whether it could be, and that 3-step process is as follows. At least my 3-step process is as follows. The first is meet the enemy or meet the problem, and it could be a singular person, or it could be a whole group of people. Possibly not even that. It could be something material, like a curse that they need to try and figure out how to quell, or anything along those lines, really. It's a pretty open and free game for that first quest. My second part is to face the problem, or realize that the problem is a problem. Make your PCs see this NPC or group of NPCs, or this curse, or whatever else you decide to do. Make them see that it is causing harm, or, well, that's for good campaigns. If it's an evil campaign, something along the lines of this enemy is stealing all of this stuff that I stole fair and square already. So this is a problem. This needs to go get taken care of. I want my stuff back. And that third step, and the final step, is something I like to call the final battleground, or end the enemy. It's something where they've finally caught up to the source of this problem, and they're finally coming to the end of it. Generally, for a quest line, your players will be very disappointed if this doesn't end in some sort of big boss, like, where's the epic loot? with your end the enemy phase, it could be anything from finding ground zero of this curse, or being introduced to patient zero of some sort of sickness that's been spreading around, or what I've actually done in the past is after that second step of face the enemy or realize the problem, I've actually had my problem, which was one specific NPC. I had them invite my PCs over for dinner. They were definitely pretty hesitant, seeing as the guy was a necromancer and he had his entire dining room pretty much set up like a torture chamber. A little unnerving, but you're the DM. It's supposed to be when you want the horror stuff, right? And that'll bring us to the third and final segment of this episode. It's our request line, or the comment line, or the question line. I think by next time I might have a name for this segment. It's definitely gonna be a thing. Now, being as there wasn't a comment question at the time that I was writing this episode, I took it upon myself to go and ask one of my players in my test group to see what he thought that I should cover. And he is the one that came up with the idea of explaining the importance of roleplay in any tabletop role-playing game. I gave him a call last week, or maybe the week before. Definitely the week before. Called him the week before, and I went, Paladin, I don't have anything. You gotta give me something, man. You gotta give me something. There's gotta be a question out there somewhere that needs to get answered. And he just was silent for a little bit, and then he goes, you know, we really like role-playing, and we really enjoy it. So why not help and explain why it's important? And I couldn't agree with him more. So, here it is, the importance of roleplay. My apologies for the change of scenery, everyone, but it was getting a little loud over at Lionheart, seeing as there's D&D on Wednesday nights. Sometimes that can get a little bit rowdy. But hey, and that brings us to the last segment of our episode here, and that is our request line, or your commented questions that you put on the YouTube channel for us. Thank you, by the way. And what I'm going to be covering in this week's request line is the importance of roleplay. It's very important, and it's very good to get into because it keeps everybody on the same track and keeps everything more entertaining. I cannot stress enough how important roleplay is to any role-playing game. Because when you're playing a tabletop role-playing game, especially if it's a homebrew-style campaign, which is generally what I do every time. I don't like running the little books with the encounters and things. But how are your players supposed to get excited about your campaign if you don't even have the enthusiasm to act it out or make sure that everything that you're saying gets worded correctly and put through in the right context? Here's how you can help that. In any type of scenario with my players, I like to do my best to paint a picture with words. Not as far as, Tolkien a page and a half about how the grass is blowing in the wind, but give them color, give them the textures of the ground, the textures of the road, the textures of the walls that they feel as they're crawling through a dungeon. The better picture you can paint for them, the more enthusiastic they're going to be and ecstatic that they're a part of your campaign. Because if you have all of this detail, it just makes it so playing the roles becomes so much easier. You can't expect your players to roleplay if you are not willing to roleplay with them. I'm assuming that everybody, when they plan out a campaign, they add what they think everything looks like, and they have it all. You have it all in your head, But the only way that your players can see it too is if you show them. You have to show them the beauty of your world, the badassery of your NPCs. Make it almost artful in the way that your main NPCs carry themselves. There's many different ways. Like every time you run into a tavern guy or a barkeep, he's not going to be the same old grouchy dwarven barkeep that's everywhere. They're all going to be different. One's going to be an elf, maybe a little more peppy than the dwarf in the first town. And then you move on a little bit, and then you come to another one that has a little gnome standing on a whole bunch of little stools behind the bar. It's just added stuff. It brings life to your campaign. It makes it so that everything isn't always the same old grind and the same old story that we've played through bunches and bunches and bunches of times in all of our roleplay experience. So try your best to bring your characters to life. The last thing that I want to go over about roleplay is I want you guys to try your absolute best to try and differentiate between the voices of your characters. Your characters can always say something simple, and you can always third person explain what your characters are saying, but that lacks the feeling and it lacks the heart of the character. Like, let's say you did walk into that same old grouchy dwarven barkeep, and you could either go, "Wow, you guys must have got back from an adventure. He says that you look like crap and asks if you need a drink." Or you can go, "Well, looks like you got put in hell in a handbasket and then shit out the other side." Just adds a little bit of texture, adds a little bit of character. Gnomes don't sound the same as dwarves, I'd assume. I guess I've never met either or before, and neither do elves. I put different accents from this world onto different accents in all of my other worlds, and kind of mix and mash them together to make it to the best of my ability. Because if you have a gnome wizard that is your guild leader, he's not going to talk like me. He's going to talk like this at you, and every single time that he has something to say, it is going to be very high-pitched, but still sound intelligent, yeah? Well, I hope this was a big help, and hopefully a motivator for my fellow DMs out there. I want to give one last shout-out to Paladin. Thank you for the idea for my last segment. I don't know what I would have done without you. So thank you. And remember, if you enjoyed the video and you found anything helpful, go ahead, give it a like. If you've got a question or just something else you got to say, go ahead and feel free to comment. And if you have found all of these Welcome to the Dungeons helpful, then I'm going to urge you, nudge, 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 nudge. Hit the subscribe button. Nudge, 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 nudge. Things and stuff. Well, I'm Nick Willard, and this has been Welcome to the Dungeon. See you next time.